When the user is closing a tab and when they have made changes to the item in that tab, you should display a message box to the user that allows them to cancel the closing action. I have implemented this already in the Detail View Model base class. As you can see, I added a constructor parameter of type iMessageDialogService. I store the MessageDialogService instance in this MessageDialogService read-only field. Now let's go to the onCloseDetailView execute method. In this method, I check if the hasChanges property of the Detail View Model base class is true, and if that's the case, I show an OK cancel dialog by using the MessageDialogService. I ask the user, you have made changes, close this item. And if the user clicks cancel, I jump out of this method by using the return keyword. This means that the after detail closed event is never published if the user clicks cancel in this message box. Now when I build the solution, we get some errors because I have adjusted the constructor of the Detail View Model base class, but I didn't adjust the friend Detail View Model and also not the meeting Detail View Model. So let's go to this first error that is in the friend Detail View Model. Here you can see that the base constructor is underlined in red. So I just pass in the MessageDialogService that I have already here as constructor parameter. Now I don't have to store this MessageDialogService instance anymore in a MessageDialogService field. I can use the MessageDialogService read-only field from the Detail View Model base class. So I remove this field here. And here we have also an hasChanges field, and you can see the field is never used. We forgot to delete this field when we refactored the hasChanges logic to the Detail View Model base class. So let's delete this field now. Now you can see here that something is red. I scroll down, and here we access the underscore MessageDialogService field. Here I just used the MessageDialogService field from the Detail View Model base class. Now let's go back to the error list. We have one error left for the meeting Detail View Model. Here it's exactly the same. We need to pass the MessageDialogService instance to the constructor of the Detail View Model base class. I can remove the initialization of the underscore MessageDialogService field, and I also remove this field from the meeting Detail View Model. I scroll down a bit where we need the MessageDialogService, and here I use the field from the Detail View Model base class. Now our code should work and we can run the application. I open up some friends, and I can still close friends if I didn't change them. Now let's go to Thomas Huber and I add my second name here. When I try to close this tab, I get a message box. You have made changes, close this item. I hit cancel. Now I can save the item and then I can close it without a message box. Let's open up this friend again and let's change it back to just Thomas. When I press the close button, I get the message box again, and when I click OK, the tab is closed and the changes are lost. So when I open up this friend again, you can see that the second name is still here. But this is exactly what we want. When the user has made changes, they see the message box, they can click cancel, then they can save the changes, and then they can close the tab. Now we are done with closing tabs in the Friend Organizer application. The next thing that we do is to keep friends and meetings in sync. So when you change a friend, this friend should also be updated in the meeting detail view. In this demonstration you learn why you should be aware of refresh issues in a tabbed user interface. Then you learn how to refresh the meeting detail view after updating a friend. To do this, you will also learn how to reload a single friend with Entity Framework. You also learn how to refresh the meeting detail view after deleting a friend. Now let's switch to the Friend Organizer application and let me show you what issues we have introduced by switching to a tabbed user interface. Here I started the Friend Organizer application. Now I open up a friend and I also open up the Watching Soccer meeting. You can see that the friend Thomas Huber is here in this Watching Soccer meeting. Now when I go to that friend and I change the first name to Julia and I save that friend and I go back to the Watching Soccer meeting, you can see that the friend is here still Thomas Huber. When I close this meeting and I open it again, then the friend has changed to Julia Huber. So as we have friends in the meeting detail view that we can change from a friend detail view, we need to ensure that the meeting detail view is refreshed. So when I change here the first name back to Thomas and when I save this, I expect that the first name in this Watching Soccer meeting is also Thomas and not Julia anymore. So let's try to implement this now by using events with Prism's Event Aggregator. Here I've opened the meeting detail view model. In the constructor I have added this line to grab the after detail saved event. I subscribe to that event with the after detail saved method. So let's right click this method and let's go to the definition. As you can see, I have added already an if statement and I check if the viewModel name of the event args is friend detail viewModel. If that's the case, we need to refresh the friends in the pick list of this meeting. But how do we refresh the friends in this pick list? Let's go to the loadAsync method where we initialize the pick list. Here in the loadAsync method, we load all the friends by using the getAllFriendsAsync method of the meeting repository. Then we call the setUpPickList method that uses all the friends to set up the pick list. So I just copy these two lines and I press Ctrl- and Ctrl- again, and now I'm back at the previous place in the after detail saved method. So with Ctrl- you can navigate back in Visual Studio. Now I remove this to-do comment and I paste the two lines here to load all the friends by using the meeting repository and to set up the pick list. To await this getAllFriendAsync method, we need to mark the after detail saved method as async. Now let's run the application and let's see if this works. I open up a friend and I open up the Watching Soccer meeting. Now I go to the friend and I change the name to Julia. I click Save and I go to the Watching Soccer meeting and the friend here is still Thomas. I go back to Julia and I change it to 2 and I add a breakpoint here. I want to see what's going on. Now I hit Save and we are in the after detail saved method in the meeting detail viewModel. The viewModel name is friend detail viewModel and now the getAllFriendsAsync method of the meeting repository is called. I hit F11 to step into that method. Here we grab all the friends from the DB context. I hit F10 and now I'm back in the after detail saved method. I hover over all friends and I expand this and I look at the first friend and you can see that the first name is still Thomas. It's not Julia 2 like we have specified it in the user interface. But hey, we have called the getAllFriendsAsync method here. This should load all the friends from the database. But actually, Entity Framework's DB context is caching entities. As we have already loaded all the friends before with this DB context instance used by the meeting repository, it doesn't load the friends again from the database. We need to implement some logic to reload that single friend, in this case with the friend ID 1 from the database. Let's see how to do this. In the previous clip, you have seen that Entity Framework's DB context is caching entities. It does not reload entities that it has already loaded before and that are part of a DB set. Now let me show you what you need to do to reload a single entity from the database with Entity Framework. So here I just use the meeting repository and I call a new method and I name it reloadFriendAsync. I pass in the ID of the friend that we need to load. And I use the await keyword here. I press Ctrl- to generate this method in the iMeeting repository interface. Let's right click on the method and let's say go to definition. Here we go, we have the method in the iMeeting repository interface. Let's change the ID parameter to friend ID so that it is explicit. Now I right click on the interface and I say go to implementation. Now we are in the meeting repository class that implements this iMeeting repository interface. I select the interface and I press Ctrl- to implement this interface in this class. I scroll down and here we have the reloadFriendAsync method where we need to reload the friend from the database. To reload the friend in this method from the database, we need to grab the DB entity entry from our DB context. To do this, we use the DB context and its change tracker. The change tracker has an entries method that is generic and we can specify the type friend to grab all the DB entity entries for the friend models from that context. Now I call the single_default method, and to use this method I need to add a using for system link. I add this by pressing Ctrl- and enter. I want to grab the DB entity entry where the ID of the entity is equal to the incoming friend ID. Now I can check if a DB entity entry exists in our DB context. If that's the case, the DB entity entry variable will be not null. And now on this DB entity entry instance, we have a method that is called reloadAsync. And you can see asynchronously reloads the entity from the database, overwriting any property values with values from the database. This is okay as we don't modify the friends over this meeting repository. We just use them read-only. So I call this method and I need to await it. To use the await keyword, I also need to mark this method here as async. Now I go back to the meeting detail view model. So here we call the reload friend async method of the meeting repository, and this will grab the DB entity entry for the friend model and will reload the entity from the database. Now let's run the application and let's see if this works. I open up Julia 2 and the watching soccer meeting, and you can see here it's Julia 2. Now I change the first name here back to Thomas and I click Save. I go back to the meeting and you can see here the added friend is now Thomas. So now we have reloaded the friend like expected. Now let's also see what happens when we create a new friend. So I add here a new friend that I call Brian Lagunas. I click Save and I go to the watching soccer meeting and you can see that Brian Lagunas is already here in the available friends. In this case, for a new friend, the reload worked already before because this entity was not in the DB context used by this meeting detail view. But now we have also another problem. When I go back to Brian and I delete this friend, and I go back to the meeting detail view, you can see that the friend is still here. So let's also refresh this pick list after a friend has been deleted. Here in the constructor of the meeting detail view model, I added this line to get the after detail deleted event. I subscribe to that event by using the after detail deleted method. So let's right click this method and let's go to definition. As you can see, I check if the view model name is a friend detail view model. This means a friend has been deleted. If that's the case, I call the getAllFriends async method of the meeting repository and I call the setup picklist method. The getAllFriends async method will use the DB context and the DB context will notice that a friend has been removed from the database. So it won't return that friend anymore. Let's see this in action and let's run the application. I open up the watching soccer meeting and I create a new friend and I call the friend again Brian Lagunas. I click Save and I go back to the watching soccer meeting. Now we can see Brian here. Now I go back to Brian Lagunas and I click the delete button. I delete the friend. Now in the watching soccer meeting, Brian Lagunas disappeared and everything is in sync. And as you might remember, when we try to delete a friend that is part of a meeting, we get this message that this friend can't be deleted as this friend is part of at least one meeting. So far we have switched the Friend Organizer application to a tabbed user interface. But we have still one problem in the application that we didn't test enough yet, and that's the creation of new items. So let's see what we need to fix there.